Maggie Lawson never thought she would see the day when her family's land, the soil her grandfather had tilled, the orchard her husband had planted, the fields she had nurtured with her own hands, would be taken from her. But here she was, standing on her porch, clutching the eviction notice in her trembling fingers. 30 days. That's all they had given her. The words on the paper blurred as she looked past it, her gaze locking onto the land that had been in her family for 3 generations. The fields were golden under the late afternoon sun, stretching out as far as her eyes could see. This wasn't just land. This was history. This was home. And now, Titan Developments had claimed it. A truck rumbled down the dirt path, kicking up a trail of dust. She didn't need to look twice to know who it was. A black SUV pulled up, its sleek, polished exterior painfully out of place against the rustic beauty of her farm. The man who stepped out looked like he had never set foot on real dirt in his life. "Mrs. Lawson," he said, offering a rehearsed, corporate smile. Maggie didn't move. "We understand that this is difficult for you. Titan Developments is offering a very generous settlement. More than fair, considering the circumstances." Her grip on the paper tightened. "Fair?" Her voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it. The man sighed, as if he had done this 100 times before. As if she was just another name on a long list of farmers they had forced out. "This land is prime for development. New housing, shopping centers, this is progress, Mrs. Lawson." She felt her jaw clench. "This is theft." A flicker of impatience crossed his face. "You have 30 days to vacate," he said, like it was a simple thing, like he wasn't uprooting an entire life. Then, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, staring at the paper in her hands as if it might change. 30 days. 30 days to say goodbye. Maggie watched as the SUV disappeared down the road, leaving a thick cloud of dust in its wake. They thought this was over. They thought she would just walk away. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Maggie spent the next few days in silence. She moved through her farm like a ghost, tracing the edges of the fields with her fingertips, walking the familiar dirt paths she had traveled for decades. The place felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because she knew it wouldn't be hers for much longer. The weight of it pressed against her chest, suffocating. She sat on the porch one evening, the eviction notice crumpled beside her. A cold cup of coffee rested in her hands, untouched. Her daughter, Emma, called that night. "Mom, you need to start thinking practically," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Titan isn't going to back down. Maybe it's time to sell. Move somewhere smaller, start fresh." Maggie closed her eyes. Emma had moved to the city years ago, chasing a life far removed from farming. She had never understood why her mother held on to the land so tightly. To her, it was just property. Just dirt. "It's not that simple, Maggie murmured. "It is, Mom." A pause. "Look, I know this is hard, but maybe it's a blessing in disguise. You don't have to work so hard anymore. You could finally rest." Rest. As if this was something she could just walk away from. Maggie wanted to argue. To tell Emma that this wasn't about the money. That this farm wasn't just her livelihood, it was her legacy. But the words got stuck in her throat. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe she was fighting a losing battle. Her chest ached as she looked out over the fields, her hands trembling slightly as she brought the coffee to her lips. Had she really come to the end of the road? And then, she heard it. 2 women at the next table, their voices carrying through the quiet evening. "Did you see that video? The one about the farm in Nebraska?" "Yeah. The woman who was losing her land? Her TikTok went viral, people donated thousands overnight." Maggie's breath caught. She turned, listening. She fought back. And she actually won. A slow realization settled in her chest, pushing past the grief, the helplessness. Could she really do this? Could she take everything she had lost and turn it into something bigger? Maggie pulled out her phone. The screen glowed in the dim light, her reflection staring back at her, a woman who had spent a lifetime working the land, who had lost everything but still had fight left in her. Her thumb hovered over the record button. She exhaled slowly, then pressed start. My name is Maggie Lawson. And this is my farm. Her voice was steady, even as her heart pounded. She turned the camera toward the fields, letting the golden light wash over them. My family has worked this land for 3 generations. I lost my husband here. I raised my children here. And now, a corporation wants to take it away. Because they think a shopping mall is worth more than a legacy. She turned the camera back to herself. But I am not leaving without a fight. And with that, Maggie Lawson declared war. Maggie didn't expect much when she posted the video. She barely understood how social media worked. She had fumbled through the recording, her hands shaking as she held the phone. She had never been the kind of person to put herself out there. But she had nothing left to lose. She went to bed that night expecting silence. By morning, her phone was exploding. At first, she thought there had been a mistake. Then she saw the numbers. 50,000 views. 200,000, 500,000. Her inbox was flooded. Comments poured in faster than she could read them. This is happening everywhere. We stand with you, Maggie. My grandparents lost their farm the same way. Tell us how to help. We need to protect family farmers. Where can we donate? Maggie's hands trembled as she scrolled through the messages. People cared. Not just a handful, but thousands, strangers from all over the country were rallying behind her. Then, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was young, energetic. Maggie, my name is Dylan. I run a TikTok account about farmland takeovers. Your story is blowing up. We need to get you on a live stream. Maggie hesitated. A live stream? She barely knew how to upload a video, let alone talk to thousands of people in real time. I don't know. She started. Listen, Dylan interrupted. This isn't just about you anymore. People are furious about what's happening. If you go live, we can raise even more awareness. Maybe even get some legal groups involved. Legal help. For the first time since she had received that eviction notice, Maggie felt something close to hope. That night, she went live. She sat in her kitchen, the same wooden table where she had once signed the deed to this land, and told the world her story. She spoke about the years of work, the struggles, the nights spent worrying about droughts and bad harvests. About how Titan developments had swooped in like vultures, exploiting legal loopholes to strip farmers like her of their land. And people listened. The donations started flooding in. $20. $50. $500. By the time she ended the stream, Maggie Lawson had raised over $200,000. She pressed her hands against her face, overwhelmed. She had started this fight alone. But now? Now, she had an army. Maggie barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, the numbers kept flashing in her mind, $200,000 raised in a single night. Messages pouring in, people offering help, lawyers reaching out, journalists wanting interviews. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't just waiting for the inevitable. She was fighting back. By morning, her story had spread even further. A national news outlet picked it up. Then another. Soon, she was getting calls from environmental activists, non-profit organizations, even small organic food brands who wanted to partner with her. She sat at her kitchen table, phone buzzing non-stop, when her daughter Emma called. Mom. You're everywhere. Maggie exhaled, gripping her coffee mug. I know, she said softly. There was a pause. I saw your live stream, Emma admitted. I didn't think people would care this much. Maggie let that sit between them for a moment. Neither did I. Another pause. Mom, what are you going to do with all that money? Maggie looked out the window, toward the field she had spent a lifetime working. "I'm going to get my farm back." And she meant it. But this fight was bigger than just her now. So when a nonprofit called Save Our Farms offered to help, she didn't hesitate. They provided her with legal support, helping her challenge the eviction. They connected her with other displaced farmers, men and women who had been pushed out just like she had. Together, they formed a collective. The money wasn't just going towards saving her farm, it was going to buy back land for every farmer who had lost theirs. And just like that, Maggie Lawson wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was leading a movement. When Titan Developments heard what was happening, they panicked. They tried to silence her. Sent legal threats. Called it misinformation. But it was too late. She was everywhere. And then came the day Maggie had been waiting for. Her lawyer called with a simple message. "Maggie, they want to negotiate." She smiled, slow and steady. Of course they did. Titan Developments had thought they were dealing with a helpless widow. They had no idea they had created a force greater than themselves. Maggie arrived at the negotiation table with the weight of an entire movement behind her. The meeting was held at a sleek corporate office, a stark contrast to the land they had tried to rip away from her. The moment she stepped inside, she could feel the tension. Titan Developments was no longer in control. Across from her sat the same man who had handed her the eviction notice weeks ago. But this time, he wasn't smirking. His suit was still sharp, his posture still confident, but Maggie could see it, the crack in his composure. They were nervous. They should be. The room was filled with lawyers, journalists, and representatives from Save Our Farms. This wasn't just a private deal anymore. This was public. Maggie sat down, folding her hands in front of her, waiting. The Titan representative cleared his throat. "Mrs. Lawson," he started, his voice measured. "We'd like to come to a mutually beneficial agreement." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" He nodded. "Given the media attention surrounding your case, we believe it would be best for all parties to find a resolution." Maggie tilted her head. "Media attention? You mean the millions of people who now know how your company exploits small farmers?" His jaw tightened. "That's not how we would phrase it," he said carefully. Maggie let the silence stretch. "Let me guess," she said finally. "You want me to take a settlement?" Quietly. "In exchange, you keep the land, and I disappear." He hesitated. Then nodded. She laughed. Actually laughed. Then, she leaned forward. "I have a counteroffer," she said. "I buy my farm back. And I buy the land of every other farmer you've stolen from." The man blinked. "That's not how this works," he scoffed. Maggie leaned back, smiling. "That's exactly how this works." She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a check big enough to make them reconsider everything. The money had come from crowdfunding, donations, nonprofit partnerships, and a new organic brand she was building with the farmers who had rallied behind her. Titan Developments had expected her to be another casualty. Instead, she had turned herself into their biggest competitor. The man stared at the check. Maggie could see the war in his eyes, greed against pride. She knew exactly how this would end. Because Titan had one fatal flaw. They cared about money. And Maggie? She cared about something much bigger. The man exhaled, jaw tight. "We'll need time to review," he muttered. Maggie smiled. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here. And so will the world." Maggie stood at the edge of her land, the sun dipping low, casting long golden streaks across the fields. Her fields. She bent down, scooping up a handful of earth, letting the soil run through her fingers. It was back where it belonged. The wind carried the sound of laughter from behind her. She turned to see a group of farmers, men and women who had once thought they had lost everything, standing together, stronger than ever. Some were walking the perimeter, planning where new crops would be planted. Others were unloading supplies, getting ready to rebuild. This wasn't just her farm anymore. It was theirs. Her daughter, Emma, stepped beside her, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. "You really did it," she said softly. Maggie smiled, "I still own the land." "We did it." There was a long pause, the kind where words weren't needed. Then, Emma nudged her shoulder. "So, what's next?" Maggie looked out at the horizon, the same land she had thought she would never see again. She had fought harder than she ever imagined she would have to. And yet, this didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning. She wiped her hands on her jeans, turning back toward the barn. "Now," she said, a slow grin spreading across her face. "Now, we grow." This story isn't just about Maggie, it's about resilience, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. Too often, corporations believe they can take whatever they want, thinking that ordinary people won't fight back. But Maggie proved them wrong. She didn't just save her farm, she sparked a movement. She reminded the world that land isn't just property, it's history, legacy, and the heart of a community. But what do you think? Did Maggie handle things the right way? Should she have taken the settlement and moved on, or was fighting back the only option? Comment 2 if you loved how Maggie took control, or 7 if you think she should have made a different choice. Let's start a conversation. And if you love stories about revenge, resilience, and powerful comebacks, make sure to like this video and subscribe to True Tales. Our storyteller, Natalie, brings you new inspiring videos every single day. Don't miss the next one.